So I think I found this year's Green Book, and that is Juror Number Two. Juror Number Two is a film that operates in a very interesting space in Hollywood right now because I feel like a lot of people are rallying around this film because Warner Brothers kind of relegated it to a couple of theaters before wanting to send it directly to streaming. And people are really against that, and so they're supporting this film. And I believe that it's expanding a little bit, or at least heading in that direction. And while I am a big supporter of the movie theaters. I love going to the movie theaters. I've been to the movie theaters like 4 times this week. But I don't think this is the film that we should rally around just because there are so many problems with it in the way that it handles people of color, women, and just overall, just a very outdated film that I don't believe should be rallied upon. But that's not to say that it's totally bad. There are some things that make this film at least watchable and decent if you don't think about it too much. And I think that's where I'm going to start talking because I don't want this review to be too negative, but also because I don't think that will take me too long to cover. So number one, the thing that I liked about this film is it has an interesting premise. It has a really cool premise. So Juror Number Two is essentially about this juror played by Nicholas Hoult, who, as the details of the case is unraveling, he realizes that he might be responsible for the murder and not the guy who's actually being tried for the murder. And that's a really interesting conversation about morality, about justice and truth that I don't think the film totally explores, but it's a good start and it's a very interesting premise right for the screen. Another thing that I liked was that it was entertaining. This film, I was never bored during the film. I found some moments extremely ridiculous, extremely frustrating, but I was never bored. And I think that that's a testament to Clint Eastwood as a director. Love him or hate him, I think that he knows how to tell a story. He knows a lot about pacing. He knows how to create an engaging drama. And so kudos to him for that. And the big thing that I really liked about this film, the only thing that I could say I solidly liked about this film was Toni Collette's performance. I think she does so much with so little. Her character is extremely underwritten, but again, she's Toni Collette, so she can make anything sing, and I think that that's more of a credit to her than it is to anything else in this film. So there are a lot of things that I think went wrong with this film. Some are more benign than others. I really do think that the framing of this film is very strange. This film really wants you to believe that the man who's currently being tried for murder is innocent. Like, it goes way overboard into making us want to believe his innocence. But again, it also wants to have its cake and eat it too. Like, it never shows us who's actually responsible for the incidents because it wants us to be doubtful of it, right? And like not really be sure, but just know that there's enough evidence to kind of not find this man guilty. But then again, take that step a little bit further. If Juror Number Two does come out, right, says the events from his side, and then he actually ends up not being the one who committed the murder, he'll most likely go to prison for just the lack of not speaking up. And that's another injustice that the film doesn't really clear up. So it can't be ambiguous for the goal that it wants to set. It really condemns the people who find this man who's being tried for murder, who are believing that he's guilty. It really villainizes those characters. And it just so happens to be that a majority of those characters are women and people of color, which is just an insane choice to be like, you're actually wrong for thinking that he's guilty. But they're not given any other reason to believe that he's not guilty. Like, it becomes the screenwriter's responsibility to provide evidence that this man could be potentially innocent, aside from the big twist that it was actually Juror Number Two, which of course no one else in the events of the film knows. But yeah, it's such a mind-boggling choice to make those people immediately the bad guys for believing in the evidence that's presented to them, for believing everything that's surrounding the case, which is their job as the jury. And I also don't think that it's like that would be reason enough for them to believe that this guy's guilty. But then when they're confronted with the possibility that he could be innocent, all of them are quick to judge, make very snap decisions, don't really care about upholding the law in any particular way. Like, they're just kind of, they made their decision, they're not going to change their minds. And that's such a dangerous thing to present these characters as. You make them into caricatures. And why does it have to be that it's the people of color who are the ones who believe this way? And all of the voices of reasons are white men primarily. That's just it. I'm hoping that it just happens to be a weird little optics thing, because Otherwise, I would have to believe that there's this intentional choice of the film, and it's such a bad choice. For example, one of the jurors who's really vehemently against this guy, the reason that he gives is because this guy has a gang tattoo. He was in a gang. Those gangs are bad people, and they can never be redeemed. They can never be changed. But then again, when they press him a little bit more about the reasoning, his big story is that is supposed to give him more development is he works with at-risk youth, so he knows what these people do to these youths. And it's like, if you worked for at-risk youth, you know that a lot of them are failed by the system set up around them. A lot of them have no choice but to turn to this life. But yet, just because they turn to this life at their lowest moments doesn't mean that they can't be redeemed. Doesn't mean that they can't change. And it's the reason that you're giving to be vehemently against this guy is the reason why you should be the most compassionate. And this is not a conversation that film wants to have. This film really just wants to put that out there, and it's so weird. And there's very clear inspiration from 12 Angry Men, but I don't think that this film is written nearly as well to reach those heights. In 12 Angry Men, you had Henry Fonda convincing these people of why this guy isn't guilty, but you had him doing it in a way that addresses their individual biases, their individual prejudice, and you understood where these characters were coming from. Even if you didn't agree with them, you understood them and they felt like real people. Whereas in this case, you don't, which is just so jarring, because then again, you go to the quote unquote heroes or the people who support the innocence of this man, and they are all white men, and they are all like, the professionals didn't do their jobs. And yes, that happens sometimes, but why do the professionals all have to be the women, right? It's like Toni Collette's character is a female. She didn't do her job in finding out all the evidence when she presented a really strong case against the defendant, which is her job, and it's actually his white lawyer's job to poke holes in her theory, but her theory is very strong, and he doesn't help his client. And I know that in the film, it kind of explains it away by like, oh, he's a public defender, he's super busy. But then again, he's like either in the courthouse or at a bar, so it's like your level of incompetence is acceptable. And then when that creates a wrongful conviction for this guy, then the blame goes to Toni Collette's character. Then the blame goes to the juries who didn't believe him. Like, why is this film doing that? It doesn't make sense, and it feels so icky. And I'm just going to try to chalk it up to bad writing, because otherwise, I don't even want to think of if any of this was actually intentional, what that means for the people who are in charge of creating entertainment for us. It's very disheartening. Honestly, I feel like I took crazy pills watching this film. I feel like I went back in time, and not in a good way. It really made me upset. And I think that if you really want to go see it, but I don't think that it's a movie that's worth your time. It definitely seems like a movie that will be like your grandparents' favorite movie, because they won't think a lot about the social undertones that are implied throughout this film. But if you're very aware of your surroundings, if you're very aware of the space that you occupy in this world, and you see how other people view you who are responsible for these films, it does hurt a little bit. It hurts your soul. And I hate that this film is the one that people are rallying around as a film to represent cinema and to represent the movie going and theater experience, because I understand it like on a surface level, but once you get to the actual material, the material does not align with the message that we're trying to put out there. And so I think it's a very weird space that we're operating in right now that I don't totally feel comfortable about. So yeah, I hope you go to the movie theaters, but maybe don't see this movie. There are so many different movies that you can go see. Go see Anora if it's in your theaters. Go see Emily Perez. Go see The Wild Robot again. Go see Beetlejuice. Like, literally go see anything else. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Juror number 2. A great cast who was just led astray by a terrible script. And Clint Eastwood just doing his best, but ultimately, it's not a good movie. Don't recommend it.